It is the new frontier of magic. The mother culture of the New World is the Maya. They are essentially the mother gods and goddesses of this land, of these two continents that you just don't know exist. And I think it's about time most practitioners awaken to that. The actual term Star Wars comes from the decoding of Maya glyphs because they had what was called the Star Wars.
Because you've mentioned that the Maya had more pyramids than the ancient Egyptians. Why do you think that people are so obsessed with ancient Greece and ancient Egypt versus anything in Central America?
Where you use smaller chimes and tapers to do, that's a very effective practical witchcraft
Tell
method
me
that
about
I've never
that.
seen anybody. The way that you offer flowers in Mesoamerican practice, it's not just you put them in a vase. Let's start with the underworld. So the underworld, I have this one. I mentioned Luke Caverns. He basically goes on a whole presentation to say that Mesoamerica should be considered a second Atlantis.
Hello, everyone. I am Ivy Corvus, and today I'm joined by Solomon, and we're going to be talking about the secrets of Mayan magic. We're going to be talking about modern practices and how everyone can incorporate this kind of stuff into their occult practice. And I am so pleased and honored because Solomon is extremely educated. Solomon, would you just like to introduce yourself, talk about your ancestral roots, your education, whatever it is that you feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, so my name is Solomon Pakal. My mother comes from an indigenous witchcraft tradition from Guatemala. She is of indigenous Cachiquel Maya descent. She was essentially raised as a bruja, a witch, and my grandmother was raised as a bruja, a witch, and her grandmother was raised as a bruja, a witch. Um, so I come from a lineage of brujas, but just a little bit of context for what brujeria in Guatemala looks like and how the indigenous practice may look like. Indigenous practice across all of modern Mesoamerica gets different because of border lines. So you'll see differences between Mexico, Belize, and in Guatemala and their expressions of such, and then various territories in those countries as well. So there are modern, like indigenous practices, Maya practices in these places. However, they may not even be aware of like the others in the most intimate of senses. What I mean by that is this. There are a section of Maya practitioners called the day keepers that still maintain the calendar and work with the spirits of the calendar. That is different from like where my parents or where my mother comes from. I have daykeeper mentors because that style of Maya magic is essentially different, or they prioritize things differently. They're much more akin to, I would say, mysticism and union with the divine and union with nature. They prioritize that. Whereas my mother's approach prioritized witchcraft and practical material manifestation more. One's not better or worse than the other, really. Like when you obviously when you practice enough, like in any art, you see that there's a utility to both and comes into balancing both categories. But given the more urban witchcraft of Guatemala, Guatemala City, Antigua, Zacatepeques, Guatemala, there was kind of a apologetic approach because they were surrounded by Catholicism. Whereas like the daykeeper traditions, while you do find some in Guatemala City and Antigua, the more famous cities are Momostenango, Quetzaltenango. These are a bit more syncretistic with their Catholicism, or they're more further away from the prying eyes of the church. Whereas in the city, you're pretty much overarched by the Catholic archons, so to speak. So there was an apologetic approach when approaching witchcraft of the indigenous sense, of like you would go to the crossroads or the river, throw a jar in there, turn around, don't look back, and then go to church on Sunday and pray for forgiveness, and then only call on the spirits again when necessary. This evolved over time in my family, though, because my father, he's American. He was the Indiana Jones type, though. He was a historian, he was a military man, and he was able to provide me and my family with essentially expeditions down south of the border where we approached examining indigenous culture and examining the ancient culture with a more just informed opinion, informed eye, more observant eye. Over time, the practice of my family evolved to become much more sophisticated, much more likened to a systematic approach that you find in such things as a Western occultism. There are like actual ritual processes, as opposed to just putting a bunch of, well, I hate to say it like that. It's not as crude as that, but it is witchcraft. Like you think of just putting a bunch of stuff together and like, calling it a day for what you want. There is more sophistication than that, knowing the correspondences, even like having a relationship with the plants. But understanding theology and cosmology is the bedrock of what I practice.
A lot more ceremonial than a folk magic approach is really what you're getting at.
Ceremonial, I guess is a way to say it. I would say it's more cosmological. Whenever you are doing ritual, you have to acknowledge that there's a much greater cosmos, and then to understand what parts of those cosmos are relevant to you. It becomes more of an adventure because you are now orienting yourself in a proper place in the universe.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And you also, I mean, because we're going to talk about what your practice looks like. Before we get into that, you are also a kind of a historian, right? Because you come from a line of historians. You have a degree in history. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
It's funny because like my mom was a witch, her mom
Yeah.
was a witch, her grandmother was a witch. I'm a historian. My dad was a historian, and then his dad was a historian. So, yeah, I prioritize my history degree focusing on world religions and things of that nature. I was also, because of my family making expeditions, essentially, I was very well traveled as a child. My dad really prioritized that I was going to be well cultured. I was going to learn how to shake hands with different people, break bread with different people. And that influenced me because I spent 10 years in the military where I went all over the world and I was able to talk to people and I was able to essentially practice different religions. I've studied all kinds of things. I've been to India. I prayed at the Golden Temple and had essentially an escorted tour of the Golden Temple that was not privy to anybody else there.
Wow.
I've studied indigenous practices in East Africa and Tanzania when I was there in 2018, 17. It was one of those. I've practiced jinn magic on the outskirts of Marrakesh and Morocco. I've prayed at mosques in southern Spain. I've done a lot of different things from more of an anthropological standpoint and taking that and bringing it into practice. It's added a whole nother level of effectiveness to my magical practice. And I'm talking about actual results because they've all compounded into a crescendoed formula of how do I approach my practical magic? How do I approach even just like looking at the world? It's been very revealing. I like to consider myself a successful magician. I mean, um,
Sure.
not trying to flex or anything, but it's like anything that you would get into magic for, I am proud of myself that I can say that I've materialized it.
Sure. Well, it's really it's a lot different when you're actually going to these sites and feeling the energy too, because it's one thing to study it in books or do it in the comfort of your own home, but when you're actually going to these sites and praying or connecting to whatever cosmological map it is that you identify with, it's so different. And my experience, going to Belize and Guatemala, it was so incredible feeling this energy of the culture and or even going to Stonehenge or whatever. I've done a couple travels here and there and the energy is different no matter what site that you're at, but it does totally improve your occult practice. Absolutely. It gives you a way to touch the energy that you just can't get otherwise. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more too. But before we kind of get into like who the Mayans were and their spirituality, how they viewed the world, and as well as some rituals and key components, of course, is this practice for everybody? Because I feel like a lot of people might shy away from this topic of Mayan magic because they feel like it's not something that they're supposed to practice or not something that they should educate themselves on or that it doesn't apply to them, etc. So what would you say on that topic?
I say that if you looked deep enough into whatever you're practicing, you will more than likely find you have nothing in common with those people who originally practiced them, and you probably have more in common with modern day Mexicans than you did with people of ancient Greece and whatnot. It's not just that, but Mesoamerican magic, broadly speaking, and Mesoamerica constitutes for Aztec, Maya, all the indigenous cultures between
Hmm.
here and South America.
Hmm.
Um, it is the new frontier of magic. It is the untapped resource that nobody is in a utilitarian way, nobody's like using it. You the Egyptians are gone. You can go visit those temples, but it's pretty much illegal to like do any kind of ceremonies there. You can do ceremonies at temples in Mesoamerica and Guatemala, Belize, you can. Those temples are still there, and there's thousands of them. I do not exaggerate that. We know of 120 to 140 pyramids in Egypt, and that's all that's there. There are 10,000 in Yucatan alone and counting because the forest has covered them up. That's the way that the land works there.
Sure.
And they're constantly being uh, discovered every day. The world's largest pyramid is called La Danta, and it's in Guatemala right now. It's currently being excavated. It's bigger than Giza, it's bigger than anything on Earth. So, in Western occultism, example, we regard ancient Greece, some people regard Egypt as well, but we definitely regard Greece as like the bedrock and the foundation of Western occultism, but definitely philosophy.
Hmm.
If you just did a day's research on ancient Greece and you modern day work with something like that, you'll realize that you don't really have much in common with them. We're kind of fed this casual approach of history that we have more in common with like these Hollywood movies depicting ancient Greece and ancient Rome, where the main character is Gerard Butler, and for some reason he has an English accent, or an epic British accent depicting ancient Greeks or Romans,
Yeah.
and we're likened to them, and we more than likely were not. But I'm not saying it's not legitimate to consider that the foundation of like what people believe today. It is Plato, Aristotle, Socrates. These are the philosophical foundations for Western thought, but also Western occult and esotericism. And it's completely legitimate to look at Hecate and Zeus and all of the major pantheonic Western deities as some kind of appropriate lineage to us because we come from that Western culture. It is appropriate to do that. And it works clearly. We have enough
Right.
anecdotal evidence to suggest that. Um, but if you consider that the mother culture of the West, which it is, and that's on a different continent, thousands of miles away, the mother culture of the New World is the Maya. The
Mm.
Maya civilization was, and they are right here. Their descendants are across our border. They're here, some illegally and some legal. But the crop is here. The sacred crop is here, was born here. Now it's all over the world. It's corn. Maize was a sacred crop. So we are partaking essentially in that holy substance. The mother culture that spawned all civilization in the new world on these continents that Americans live in, at least. Um, wouldn't it make just as much sense if you were going to pay homage to ancient Greece, to pay homage to the mother culture of whose land you are inhabiting right now? And I do not say that America totality falls under this regard because Western Europe was influenced by Greece and they're not occupying Greek lands.
Sure.
The Maya, and especially the maize of corn that was traded amongst the Maya and all of Mesoamerica, it reaches as far as Canada, pre-Columbian, meaning that the spread of those ideals, just like the Greek ideals spread far west, this spread north and south.
Mm.
Written language originated with Mesoamerica, and it spread to the south to the Inca. The Aztecs would adopt it. Another fun fact, too, is that all Mesoamerican practice can also be considered just like American practice because the Aztecs aren't really from Mexico. The Aztecs migrated into Mexico from the Southwest United States. There are Mayan bodies, ancient Mayan bodies found in Cahokia because during the downfall of Chichen Itza, Cahokia was at its apex, and you had immigration essentially from the Yucatan Peninsula to the Cahokia land mounds, the pyramid mounds. So there were sacrificial victims and people that just died found in Cahokia. So Mesoamerica pre-Columbian was much more fluid than what we think. We have these colonial borders. It wasn't two continents at one time. That was just because of the Panama Canal. It was one continent united by, and I don't want to, it's not like some utopia united, but it was much more esoterically influenced in thought, much more communal in thought than how we would think about it today.
Yes.
They are essentially the mother gods and goddesses of this land, of these two continents that you just don't know exist. And I think it's about time most practitioners awaken to that. The other thing is that we talked about a little bit before this. I'll give it the spark notes, but the unification of the world happened in 1492. There was two halves of the planet Earth. And symbolically, if you're an occultist, how do you not look at this and see some kind of epic occasion happening? The most important event in our world history wasn't in 1945 with the atomic bomb. It wasn't with Elon Musk buying Twitter. It was with the foundation of the Americas, because it took the two halves of this planet Earth that a lot of pagans worship for good reason, and it united them. It's uniting the two cerebral cortexes of the earthly brain. How do we not see that as important? It made us, essentially, it was the beginning of making us one human race. So that's why I would say there are esoteric implications behind people practicing Mesoamerican stuff going into the future that we can't even foresee.
I had no idea that the Mayan lineage, I guess, spanned so far because I have a very basic understanding of the Mayans and what they did just based on my own study prior to my trip. But I had no idea that it spanned up into North and South America as far as the influences. And I know you briefly mentioned corn, so we're probably going to hit on that in a second because that's really, that's like a sacred part to the Mayans. I understand that. So I guess just to lay a good foundation for everybody listening who may not be aware, who may not know anything about the Mayans, who were they? Why are they significant historically? If you want to talk about the what was it? The corn, not the corn doll. It's the fill in the blank for me. It's the creation story where everybody is
Yes,
made of
yes.
corn. Yeah, so if you want to talk
We can
about all
talk about
that,
that.
that would be great. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So first, I gotta put my historian's hat on, and if any eggheads are watching this, we're going to clear this up. So the technical term is not Mayans, it's Maya. Maya people.
Okay.
Is really used for everything else besides Mayan calendar and Mayan language. It used to be different, but in the academic community, Mayan became more of like a 2012 thing and like a casual, like not a historian way. Like nowadays, especially amongst indigenous cultures, they kind of like it's better to say in English sometimes with like generalized talk and adjectives and whatnot. So sometimes like saying Mayan gods sounds better than Maya God. You know, it just kind of rolls off the tongue more. So
Yeah.
some of the like the Mayan Wisdom Project in Guatemala, they use the word Mayan, not Maya. And they're actual day keepers, like they're actual indigenous people in Guatemala that are the teachers in that program. And it's headed by the daughter of a very renowned Maya daykeeper. So it's good as a knowledge check of like, does this person actually study Maya history, Maya archaeology, Maya anthropology, between Maya and Mayan? I'm going to be honest, I use both interchangeably unless I'm talking to a historian because of those descriptive reasons. Like
Mhm.
Mayan magic sounds, it's easier to carry on the conversation with Mayan magic rather than Maya magic.
Okay.
And I'm not the only historian that feels this way too. Luke Caverns, who he's on YouTube and he does a bunch of ancient archaeology. He did a presentation at Cosmic Summit called Mayan Atlantis
Yeah.
because it just sounds better. And he knows, like he's done debunking videos before from like charlatans. So he's actually a professional that he sees the kind of grammatical practicality of using it.
Hmm.
So that being said, so who the Maya were, um, we have to do a kind of like a broad Mesoamerican. I'll give you a Mesoamerican kind of outlook for it. The Maya history, for instance, right? So like Aztecs, um, the Aztecs were actually only around for 300 years prior to the Spanish arriving in Mexico.
Mm.
They came at the tail end of what Mesoamerican history, the post-classic period was. The Maya were around for 3,500 years prior, like throughout Mesoamerican history. So a lot of people like to confuse Maya Aztec as like being the same thing. They use the Aztec sundial to mean the Mayan calendar. There's very big differences, very
Right.
big differences, similarities, but very big differences. Again, 300 years versus 3,500 years of history. Pretty big. Um, Now, Maya history was not a monolith. There's entire periods of time, 3,500 years, that's a long period of time, right? So we have what's known as a pre-classic period, classic period, post-classic period, and then colonial period. We still consider that happening today. And there's a small little technical period called the terminal classic between post-classic and classic. What do those terms mean to occultists, right? Pre-classic is now we're starting to find a lot more weird stuff with the pre-classic that I think a lot of conspiracy theorists will have a heyday with, because the cities we are finding in the pre-classic, which certainly predate Christ, are some of the biggest cities to ever have been found in the ancient world. Uh, I mentioned Luke Caverns. He basically goes on a whole presentation to say that Mesoamerica should be considered a second Atlantis. And I don't believe in, like, just full disclosure, I would agree with someone like Luke Caverns or other people. I don't believe in an actual Atlantis. I don't believe in like aliens built the pyramids and stuff like that. What I do believe in is that these ancient peoples were much more esoterically and occultly powerful than we give them credit for. I'm not saying they were levitating crap. I'm saying that they built all of this through hard work, but they had contact with higher forces that definitely influenced
Mm.
and perhaps in more practical ways assisted. I'm not talking about like giant hands from the sky. I'm just talking in much more subtle ways to help build these massive monuments.
Right.
So the things that we are finding are just as good as if we found Atlantis. Like all of the hoopla about we have to find Atlantis and stuff like that. Um, what realistically, what could possibly be described if you look at the Atlantis tales is not like hovercraft or like all of this like sci-fi stuff that we kind of project on the idea of Atlantis,
Yeah.
but we find it in Mesoamerica. It's advanced civilizations that predate our concept of civilizations on this part of the world, at least. Classic period Maya, you find a lot of Games of Thrones stuff. The actual term Star Wars comes from the decoding of Maya glyphs because they had what was called the Star Wars in Maya, in the Maya classic period, where you had all these cool city states like the Snake Kingdom versus the city of the Jaguar God of the Underworld and stuff like that. And it was a big, like George R. R. Martin would have had a field day looking at classic Maya history. A fun fact, here's an Easter egg. If you watch the very first Star Wars, not the Phantom Menace, if you watch the one with Luke Skywalker, A New Hope, on the planet where the rebels are staging their attack, there's a quick snapshot of the ruins of Tikal, where the X fighters are.
I,
Uh, George Lucas filmed Star Wars, a part of Star Wars in Guatemala.
what? I
And
didn't know that.
so I have a theory that he was kind of giving an homage to the original Star Wars, which was in the classic period Maya, which Tikal was like the main star of the Star Wars
Yeah.
in the classic Maya. So cool Easter egg there.
Yes.
Um, but that's who they are. Uh, and their descendants extend to today. The Maya are still around. Obviously, I'm here, but like at least 8 million Maya in Guatemala alone. Probably another 2 million in the Yucatan Peninsula, maybe a million in Belize, a couple of thousand in El Salvador and Honduras. Mesoamerica extends from central Mexico. This is Mesoamerica, not just the Maya. The Maya's Yucatan down to parts of Honduras. But Mesoamerica, broadly speaking, was central Mexico all the way down to Costa Rica,
Right.
through Costa Rica. I say that because there was many different civilizations. There was the Teotihuacanos, there was the Toltecs, the enigmatic Toltecs, the Zapotec. They're one of my favorites. The Olmecs, one of my favorites, and they all had similar magic systems and they had similar religious beliefs, similar mathematics and astronomy. We could do a whole nother podcast just on that alone and the
Yeah.
magic of using Mesoamerican astronomy and Mesoamerican mathematics.
Mm.
Because it was highly esoteric. These were advanced magicians and not just magicians. They did rituals that encompassed entire city states. So tens of thousands of people partaking in giant plaza-based rituals.
Right.
Covering up covering another misconception. There was never a Maya empire or a Mayan empire, as a lot of people like to think. They were a loose confederation of city-states. Now, the Aztecs, they were an empire. They literally just like banged on people's doors and took people over. Whereas like the Maya worked on different alliances between city-states.
Yeah,
So,
that was one of the biggest differences that I knew of is that the Maya, and by the way, I'm pretty sure I'm one of those eggheads that has absolutely been saying Mayans. So thank you for clearing up that terminology. The Maya. Okay. No, but I knew there were city-states and they weren't necessarily an empire, and that's what kind of differentiated them from the Aztecs. But another question for you that really wasn't on our discussion topic today, but if you don't mind answering, how would you differentiate the Maya? What did they do that was extra special in comparison to the other civilizations that you've studied in Mesoamerica, I should say? Is there anything that stands out?
there's plenty that stands out, but I'll
Okay.
zero in on the big one. The big one is that the mathematics and the astronomy took off with the Maya in ways that it did not elsewhere in Mesoamerica. The biggest contributions to writing, that too, the hieroglyphic system, writing, you could argue various civilization things like temple building and stuff like that, but like the Zapotecs had amazing temples. The Teotihuacanos had amazing temples too. So that could be contentious. The Maya had more pyramids, that's for sure. The Maya had more pyramids than any other civilization in the history of the world. World, not new world, world. Um, so you could argue that, but it would definitely be the astronomy and the mathematics. So what we do know is that they had accurate calendars. There's more than one kind of calendar.
Right.
Um, I'll say this as far as achievements goes without getting too much into esoteric with the calendar. To this day, we don't know who had the most accurate calendar, whether it's modern man or the ancient Maya. The difference is like 0.002 of a second, or maybe I think it's two, either a second or three to the right of 0 second difference of who has the most accurate solar calendar, calculating 365 days.
Wow.
So it's actually still debated. That's pretty awesome. If you could do that with horizon-based astronomy, that means sticks and strings and stones and eyesight, and you could match modern computers and you can match modern satellites.
Wow.
That's confirmed. I have my own speculative theories. I have passed through other reputable anthropologists and archaeologists' hands, and they are taking it back to their desks and now they're spooling over it. I have theories that the ancient Maya developed set theory before it was set theory, as in multiple sets of infinity and
Mhm.
higher irrelevant numbers past infinity. Because if you're not a math nerd, infinity is not the highest number there are. Like in modern mathematics, we have the Aleph systems or the Aleph systems. Aleph null is beginning of quantifiable infinity. So the Maya used glyphs that were either depicted as shells or flowers, depending on where they were at, for either zero or infinity. And within these codexes, you see a plethora of zeros and infinities used, and they're using it multiple times. This begs the question, are they counting multiple infinities? Their
Mhm.
range for numbers were clearly they could easily count into the billions. We have that in the codices. They counted back 33 million years. And this does not need like some kind of extraterrestrial technology. You can do this with horizon-based astronomy. Just it takes a long time. And the math is like mind-boggling. You would need probably a temple side of chalkboard to like put down the equations. But they were able to do this. So set theory was invented in the 1880s by some German mathematician. If the Maya came up with set theory, that means they did it almost 2,000 years beforehand. That's a monumental achievement. Another thing that my theory is that they came up with is that the king Kanbalam, the Kanbalam of Palenque, I believe he had the equation to develop the heliocentric theory 600 years before Copernicus, 800 years before Copernicus. We know this because of the temple placements at Palenque, because it tracks the retrograde positions of three planets, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter. That's the same retrograde algorithm, so to speak, that Copernicus used to make the heliocentric theory.
Right.
So there's no concrete proof for it, but there's some evidence that that might have happened.
Why do you think this brings up a totally different tangent? Because you've mentioned that the Maya had more pyramids than the ancient Egyptians, that they had the largest pyramid in the world. And why do you think that people are so obsessed with ancient Greece and ancient Egypt versus anything in Central America? I mean, it's not just the Maya, it's other cultures as well. Why do you think that is? Why is there such an obsession to that part of the world, and then this part of the world gets completely ignored?
Easy language and cultural barrier, language, cultural barrier, and cultural perception.
Sure.
When you like, it's a sensitive topic, but we have to discuss it. I think 2024 is a good year to start discussing this topic. There's a lot of racism put on people south of the border, that they're essentially a bunch of dirty wetbacks and they don't really have much to contribute. And colonization helped like keep indigenous people uneducated. To this day, indigenous people are the least educated population in these countries. So when you think of, if I said ancient Greece, what do you think of? You probably think of Gerard Butler as Leonidas
Sure.
and all of the sophisticated Athenians and whatnot. You think of Julius Caesar with Rome. You think of Cleopatra with Egypt. Western civilization period traces its lineage to those ancient Greek authorities and Egyptian authorities and Roman authorities. So they is a sense of cultural pride and perception that that was the epic times, almost a nostalgic look at the ancient past, despite all, despite them having human sacrifice as well, infanticide, uh, corruption, all that. Like, it's just kind of like the perception we have.
Hmm.
Corruption, all those bad things, they exist everywhere. But to say that like they're exclusive to one or the other is incorrect, or like one society is like better than the other because they, for some reason. The thing is that Western society looks at Egypt and Greece and Rome as their foundation pillars. We view Latin America as essentially being more backward and developing. There's also a lot more like ancient documents translated from the Greek through your channel of languages or directly from Greek to English.
Hmm.
You don't have that with a lot of Spanish speaking stuff. Like in America now, we look at like, yeah, Spanish is probably like the easiest language to learn, but that's because of an immediacy thing. This is still pretty recent. Um, when it comes to going to these places in Europe, I've never been to Greece, but I've been to Croatia. There's a lot of people who speak English. And Croatia is like shares a border with Greece. You can kind of get away with not knowing much language. You go to Mexico. Nowadays it's changing, but for the majority of the modern history, you had to know Spanish.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so there's cultural barriers, there's language barriers, and perception barriers, and that's really why. It's so strange because that's perception is so much because if there are that many pyramids, right? Like, why wouldn't people be flocking? I don't know. Why wouldn't people be flocking? And it's really just because people have this wrong idea about approaching things. If I said to you as a modern practitioner, whatever your pantheon was, whatever your gods or whatever you work with, that there was massive temples that you could go to and essentially have a spiritual experience at, no matter what the culture was, would you do it? And the answer would be yeah. What if
Yeah.
I said it only takes a 3-hour plane ride? Even better, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's that's the case with Mesoamerica. It's not the case with Greece. It's much harder to do that. It's much like Thailand. There's a lot of people that practice Theravada Buddhism in occult circles, and there's various Thai witchcraft practices as
Hmm.
well. Um, it costs a lot to get there. Like I was looking at going to Thailand for MMA reasons, for Muay Thai reasons. It's a
Yeah.
1,300 plane ticket, like $1,300 to get there.
It's
You know,
expensive.
it's like 24-hour plane ride. You don't have to do that with Latin America. You can just go. And nowadays it's like there's a lot more development down there, tourism and stuff like that. And people want to kind of crap on the tourism. The tourism's kind of paying off because it's getting American dollars there. And there's bad things to that too. Trust me, there's bad things. There was something very recently that happened that was culturally very bad, getting more rich Europeans and Americans down there. But
Mm.
overall, it's good because it's showing people that, wow, Latin America has essentially an Atlantis that is unexplored largely and can be celebrated. And these people should be celebrated.
No, it's so true. And what you were saying about going to Greece. So I actually went to Greece last year, and then I also went to Belize and Guatemala, as you already know. And it was so different, the spiritual experiences I had in Greece versus Central America, because when we went to those sites like Acropolis and we went to all the different, temples and sacred places and all of that, it was, to me, I did not receive as much spiritual energy as I did in Central America, because I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because there was too many people there. It had been renovated a million times and it felt like it had lost its connection to the ancient world. I don't know, but Acropolis, for me personally, I could not connect to the energy at all. But then I went to Tikal in Guatemala and it was so overwhelming. And maybe it was because it was more foresty, less people. You hear the monkey swinging in the trees. I don't know what it is, but the energy was so, you could touch it, you could feel it. And it was very different than Greece. So yeah, I think you're right. Like, people should just get on a flight, a 3 hour flight or whatever, and go to Central America, if you're in the United States at least, and experience that, because it's so cool. Yeah, I can't express enough how life-changing that was for me. And I wanted to talk about the Maya as far as the key elements in their spirituality. So, if you wouldn't mind kind of going into how they viewed what their cosmological map looked like. I know they had a relationship with the macrocosm. They were very much into the planets. I think the sun, moon, and Venus were the top three. Correct me if
There
I'm
there are, but there
okay.
are some things that we can go a little inside baseball with Venus if you
Okay.
want,
Yeah.
because there's some misconceptions. Even really, even archaeologists have misconceptions about that. Like when you really look at the sources, it's much more layered than they're just saying this was. A lot of them say like this was the god of Venus or this was the goddess of Venus or something like that. I'll just say this really quickly. The way that the Maya regarded Venus was kind of like how occultists viewed the moon, where it had different phases. So it wasn't just one god of Venus in the planetary sense. It was like throughout all the phases, different deities ruled those different phases.
Oh, wow.
So because Venus has phases, just like the moon has new moon, has full moon, waxing, waning. Venus is not just the morning star. It is evening star, superior conjunction, and inferior conjunction. And there are deities that rule certain conditions of those phases and how they would manifest on Earth. So the question is, what are the key elements, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so the key elements, right? How archaeologists categorize it. I would say this is a fantastic start of how to diagnose not just Maya magic, but all of Mesoamerican magic, Mesoamerican religion, as the academics would say. They've split it up into five main components. I actually extend it out to seven. As a
Mm.
practitioner and closer examination, I extend it out to seven, and I'll explain why. So the first would be deity worship. So think like your typical pantheistic gods, these gods that they built temples to and they built statues to, and they have stela uh, up as, and they have massive mythological stories of these personified deities. The big Maya deities like Kukulkan, the feather plume serpent god, or Chak, the rain god, or Itzamna, the creator father, or Ixchel, the goddess of the rainbow, and the creatrix. Deities like that. That's deity worship. The second is ancestral worship. Now, the thing is, ancestral worship, it's not just grandma. It's not just like praying to grandma and leaving her some treats. The Maya had a practice of actually burying their ancestors underneath their houses. So this created a much more intimate and practical relationship with a spirit on the other side. So a highly more functional form of ancestral veneration than we would think. But that's not all, folks. The biggest example of ancestral worship is found in the ancient Maya kings, specifically, I would say like the classic period kings. Reason being, if you were an ancient Maya royalty, king or queen, you had to go through ritual processes, 3 days of seclusion into a completely dark chamber, blood sacrifice and meditation with the deities. And then you would emerge as the rightful ruler. Now, what is your obligation? You have an obligation. You can't just rule the people. You are now a supernatural advocate of the city state to the gods. You are now an intermediary spirit. So every one of those Maya kings and queens essentially became like how we view like Saint Cyprian. I would argue that the ancient kings are much more powerful than Saint Cyprian, and that's a whole nother story. Tangent. In Latin American folk magic, I talked to other occultists about this too.
Mhm.
Saint Cyprian's actually he kind of ain't shit. Like to like most Hispanic people like south of the border, like there's Saint Cyprian candles and stuff like that, but there's like better folk saint spirits. Like he's kind of like faulty, but like San Simon is like bigger and stuff like that. So I just want it's something that gets on it. Cyprian's like very fashionable, I've noticed in Western occultism, but how he's like actually regarded in Hispanic communities is like, yeah, he's there. But it's like there's other saints that typically go to.
Nice.
Um, but the ancient Maya kings and queens were essentially all like King Solomon. We see them as some kind of intermediary prophet that after they die, now they are coming back. We can conjure them as like essentially demigods to assist us in warfare and trade and anything that the people of the city need. So a big part of my practice, I do summon ancient Maya kings. I have a specific process of how I do it. So these kings were actually demigods. So when you think of apotheosis, deification of the self, this is what it actually falls under ancestral worship. Because if you're deifying the self, you are retaining some part of the ego. They are not necessarily evaporating into like the god spectrum of all of the Platonic kinds of ideal forms.
Mhm.
That's where deity worship is that those are ideal forms made a bit more personable. But ancestral worship meant like elevating these ancient kings to like a big status of supernatural power. And then post mortem, and while they were still ruling, they would benefit the people. So you make them offerings, you call them back and evoke them. They were etched into temple walls after they died. So it's a very, very nuanced level to ancestral magic that I don't think Western magic has really tapped into just yet. Where like people are still kind of they still find intermediary spirits very exotic.
Mhm.
It's still not a big formal piece of Western practice. Like you see it, there's good examples, but it was much more common and systematized in Mesoamerica. So that's two. Three would be shamanism.
Oh, yeah.
So shamanism, take your ideas of contemporary shamanism and now the most tangible, I'll hearken it to the most tangible example of shamanism that we have in Mesoamerica, and it's called Nahualism. So a Nahual is essentially like a spirit animal that the person would have a relationship with, a spiritual connection with. Um, to the point where they essentially could transform, like Nahualism is basically lycanthropy, but in Mesoamerica. The biggest examples we find are actually with the Olmec. But you find Maya were jaguars too. But the transformation process of a human into a half jaguar, half man kind of creature. You see this in the codices as well. It wasn't just jaguars. There was everything from ducks and deers, and there's modern tales of Wei Shivo, which is like a were goat, like somebody transforming into a goat. Um, but where jaguars was the big one. Tecún he was a revolutionary Maya leader. His Nahual was the Quetzal. You've been to Guatemala, the Quetzal is the national bird. That's why. It's because when Pedro de Alvarado killed Tecún the legend has is that he transformed into the Quetzal and ascended. But that's why on the Guatemalan flag you have the Quetzal. Yeah, on the Guatemalan, they're quetzales. The dollar, the currency is quetzales.
Right.
So there was lycanthrope relationships done with the animals to transform and seek wisdom. And you find similar things in northern plains Indians and Pacific Northwest
Yeah.
Native American legends as well.
Oh, yeah.
Then so that's three. Four would be animism. So animism, we could go through like the whole like Wikipedia definition, right? But I'll give you examples of uh, what was truly beautifully animistically advanced of Mesoamerica. Math was sacred. Math was not just sacred, but it was a living thing. Math was a force of nature that you could communicate with.
Hmm.
Um, Cacao is like for some reason now the craze with a lot of like
It is.
like crystal mamas and like yoga
Yeah,
teachers and whatnot. I don't know where that came from because it's like cacao was like a thing when I was like growing up, but it was like kind of just a thing. And I do know that the gatekeepers do regard it a little bit more special than how like the witchcraft tradition did.
sure.
Um, but that's another example. But the biggest, hands down, the best example of animism in practice is this. This is jadeite. Jade is a living and the most powerful of all stones. Reason being, so we know of directions, right? We have four directions, right? In Mesoamerica, there's five directions: northwest, east and south, and center.
Oh,
So if you look at a Native American medicine wheel, the colors stay mostly the same: red, black, white, and yellow. But in the middle is a green blue color. And I say green blue because in the ancient Maya, they had the word yash, which means green blue. It does not mean specifically one or the other. It was a kind of like the two colors were in a dance all the time.
wow.
So depending on how you cut the stone, it would come out either or somewhat both. So the thing is that if you were to have be encrusted with jade and have a relationship with jadeite, you were orienting yourself to the center direction. Does this sound very similar to like maybe the middle pillar?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So the thing is, so that's why even in the Popol Vuh, there's a prayer to stay on the green road, the green path, the green direction. The green direction will lead you through the underworld safely. If you take any of the other roads, you may be deceived.
Hmm.
And I accidentally took one of the wrong roads one time and ended up in Mansfield, Ohio, and that place is hell. So
Okay, let's not do that.
but the relationship with Jade is by far the coolest and most powerful types of crystal magic like ever. That's something I would be willing to bet money on. Is like you take your Herkimer diamond, you take your Andara crystal, and I take a piece of jade, and over the course of about 90 days, let's track results. And I near guarantee the jadeite will have a much cooler effect on your reality.
Mm. Yeah. Well, kings were buried with jade too,
They
right?
were
I mean,
buried with jade. Jade
yeah.
was a ceremonial item
Hmm.
of all kinds of things. I could go on and on about jade. I could go on and on about jade. I'm going to write a book on it one day. It's going to be awesome.
Great.
But that is animism. That's number four. Five, time worship. So time, you could kind of see this as like an animistic thing, but time was so revered and is such a predominant force in our reality that
Hmm.
it needed its own category. So much so they made several calendars worshiping time. The biggest and most famous calendar is the 260-day calendar, also known as the human calendar. It roughly lines up to the period of human gestation, whereas like it's like a geocentric calendar, a human-centric calendar. Whereas the Hab, so that's a human-centric calendar is called the Solkin or the Cholki in Quiche Maya. The Hab is the solar calendar, 365 days, which is a heliocentric calendar. They have various calendars for various things. They also had calendars for the planets that they tracked. 584 days, I believe it is, for Venus, 782 for Mars. I might be wrong on the lower digits of that one. But anyways, the Maya day signs of the Solkin calendar, they each have glyphs because they are essentially every day sign and each day sign rules a day is a living spirit. Kind of like how in planetary magic we see what's today? Friday. So Venus rules today. Freya's day, Frigg day, uh, is today. So Freya has domain over today.
That's really
But so
funny.
like astrological magic today, Friday, Venus, today, the day signs don't repeat in like 7-day cycles. They repeat on 20-day cycles. So
Sure.
today is Keeb, the day of wisdom.
Hmm.
Um, so that force has a rulership over today. Whatever day you were born under, that day sign has a rulership over you, kind of like a nativity angel,
Right.
but in a much more, I want to say, just a weird kind of way, because the way the day signs act, they're not so much as personified gods as they are snapshots of prophetic mythological situations. So like the day of like today was when the first candle, the first light in the universe was lit. Depending on the mythology, the one I go by typically is that Itzamna, the god of fire, lit the first candle, or he lit the first torch in the
Yeah.
vast darkness of nothingness that was the universe prior to creation. Then the gods started making creation once the first light was made. So it's like a snapshot of that period in time. Yeah, so that's time worship, is that you I'm going to do this because this day aligns with that day. We're going to honor the days of today. That is what the day keepers do today. They focus on time worship. And this part of time worship, working with the Mayan calendar, is some kind of magic that I basically recommend to any one of my clients or like anybody I've ever worked with, because it's a nativity force that you are basically entitled to. Um, magic's not inherently safe, but I would say like the safest you could get is probably working with day signs, because you are linked to it whether you like it or not. Um, when you have attunements with that day sign, you are probably going to have manifestations in your life that will eventually lead you to some kind of prosperity, because
Interesting.
you are bonding to your nativity force.
So people can just look up their day sign. Is that a thing?
You
And
can
then
look up your day sign. I mean, getting in touch with it, that's a whole nother thing.
sure, sure.
But like everybody should be getting acquainted with their day sign. So that's time worship. That's the fifth one. Sixth one. These are the ones that I extend more to. Six, geospatial worship. So what this is at its most rudimentary, is the four directions. But
Mhm.
this extends into dimensional sciences. And I'm not talking quantum physics. Quantum physics, everybody in the new age and occult want to talk about quantum physics. Even scientists don't even really know like that much about quantum physics. So it's like us reading paperbacks probably know even less, right?
Right.
But regular dimensional sciences get trippy. And the Maya had an idea of this. Even in the more superstitious witchcraft traditions, they're tapping into it. So dimensions, the directions are the bridge into higher dimensions, meaning like we have a three-dimensional universe, there's a four-dimensional, and so on and so forth. Whether you believe that caps out at 10, 11 plus string theory or infinite, it kind of doesn't matter because they're all like infinitely bigger than us, right?
Yeah.
But working with the directions in magic is a big deal with the Mesoamericans. They had a plethora of different directional principalities. So in the Yucatec tradition, you have the Bacabs. They were the four giants that held up the earth.
Mm.
Uh, they ruled the four jurisdictions. They're like actual giants, like gigantic, like statues, like actual giants, right?
Yeah.
Holding up like the Atlas. There we go. Like kind of more like Atlas, but directional atlases. Um, in you have directional spirits that correspond to certain elements, like the winds, the Powhatuns, or the Chalks. There's four Chalks. There's also the rain god Chalk, but then he kind of can separate himself into four rain principalities.
Hmm. Hmm.
Then you have the Balameb. So the Balameb were the first humans, demigods created by the gods. And they were the first primal men and women, they had wives as well, that led the first humans out of the seven caves of primal earth to the first sunrise. And then human civilization would begin. And
Hmm.
they each, the four jaguar men, they ruled the directions as well. Uh, so there's a bunch of different directional like gods essentially and directional personalities. This also extends to cryptids, because they're there 1 minute and then they're not. Um, the duendes, that's how you say it in Spanish, but essentially Mesoamerican dwarves and gnomes are a big part of especially the witchcraft tradition. They
Yeah.
are huge in the witchcraft tradition. Like my mom and my abuela had such a relationship with duendes. It's ridiculous. It's like it became like a they would misplace your keys everywhere and stuff
Oh
like
yeah.
that. If you can look up even some found footage of some like weird duendes. Just search duendes on YouTube. You'll find some weird happenings and stuff like that. And
Oh
they'll
yeah.
there's like weird geometries that show up on the camera. This is because it falls under geospatial worship, geospatial magic, because it's all playing on additional axes. We have more axes than a two-dimensional character on a Nintendo screen.
Mm.
And whatever is above us has more axes that places it on the physical hierarchy higher than us. So whatever these like more fey cryptic kind of creatures are, this falls under the geospatial realm of magic and category of magic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's number 6. The 7th gets a bit trippier, and you as a chaos magician should really love this.
Sure.
Narrative worship.
Oh yeah.
So ev so in chaos magic, especially pioneered by such chaos magicians as Grant Morrison, who's also a famous comic book artist, one of my favorite authors of all time, very influential in my life. The idea of essentially manipulating narrative and sigilizing it is an ancient Mesoamerican practice.
Oh
Um,
really? Wow.
it is. We have, I just got out of a 5-week course on the city of Palenque, and this was documented in in Palenque on the temple walls and stuff. So apparently, after the destruction of the first era of Palenque by the Snake Kingdom, a ruler named Kinich Hanab Pakal would ascend to the throne. But he was essentially ruling a city that had missing history. So he had to reclaim the history.
Mm.
And he basically made a narrative. If I'm saying it in the most cynical way, he made a narrative. I believe because they were so esoteric and we have evidence of all the rituals, they channeled a narrative.
Okay.
They channeled a narrative through ritual of a new specific creation place called Matwil. And Matwil was described as essentially a blank beach or the blank canvas of creation, which the mother goddess and father god created a triad of gods. And from that lineage came Pakal. Like eventually the rulership would trace their lineage back to that trinity, and then that mother goddess and father god.
Mm-hmm.
They had to recreate a narrative, and this narrative was worshipped so much that it would be carried on post-mortem after Pakal, where Pakal would be described ordaining the incoming kings after he was dead, ordaining them into this now pataphysical lineage. And it became legit. So legit that they outlasted the Snake Kingdom that formerly defeated them. So the idea of manipulating narrative, implementing character, and essentially, as Morrison says, hyper sigilizing
Right.
is a Mesoamerican practice that it even consists in the witchcraft tradition as well. Um, Without going too much into it, there's a legend of a creature called El Sombrerón or El Charro Negro in Mexico, which he is a essentially like Hispanic ghost rider where he meets the devil at the crossroads, makes a deal to become depending on the legend, either the best mariachi in the land or the fastest racer in the land.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he essentially becomes the debt collector for the devil. And he rides on a black horse. He has a skeletal face. He has a sombrero and he plays a guitar. And he goes to all of the people that owe the devil money, favors, or souls, and he collects.
Wow.
So, but this is how the narrative has changed throughout Latin America. The sightings of such are pretty plentiful, and this extends to La Llorona too, but I'll save that one for another time. There's a lot of cryptids in Latin America that essentially have police records. If you go to police departments in Guatemala City,
Mm-hmm.
there's things like La Llorona actually has like a body count. Like there's people that La Llorona sighting, missing person, missing person, missing person. Same thing. My abuelo had a relationship with La Llorona and El Sombrero, two essentially folk magic spirits that have pataphysical properties.
And there's so much that you touched on that I want to dive deeper into, but I know I also want to get into specific rituals that they did because that's a huge conversation because we can talk about our experiences in the caves. We can talk about ritual sacrifice. We can talk about their rituals, with the calendars and working with the planets and the macrocosm and all that. So, are there any key elements, or not key elements, but are there any rituals in particular that you find really fascinating?
Well, from a historical standpoint, a lot of their rituals that get cited are like the massive citywide rituals.
Hmm.
And this is where critics, even in like indigenous communities today, or like indigenous indigenous people that want to reclaim indigenous heritage will say, oh, we don't have evidence of this. We don't have evidence of that. We do have evidence that they did rituals like this, where they did a lot of dancing and they wore a bunch of regalia and stuff. And it's like, yeah, but from a esoteric, like if I'm doing like practical witchcraft, that's not practical. I can't get a whole bunch of people and do dances all the time. So that's not the only way that you can worship the old gods. Like it's not the like uh I know this from lineage, but I mean just kind of know it from look at any spiritual practice. Look at any like put yourself walk those pyramids, look at those temples, look at the display of the gods, and tell me they didn't just like prayed. Tell me they didn't just try talking to the deity. So when we think of Maya, Aztec, Mesoamerican rituals, we think of like Apocalypto, the movie, where they're on a gigantic temple. There's dancers at the bottom, and they're cutting hearts out. According to the recent findings to by Dr. Edwin Barnhart, he has a great like short YouTube video. You can actually look this up. The A lot of that was over embellished by the Spanish. However, the Aztecs were much more. I'm not trying to throw shade on the Aztecs. It's just the way it was. The Aztecs were much more into the human sacrifice than the Maya were.
Mhm.
And depending on the time period you're talking about with the Maya, post-classic Maya definitely prioritized human sacrifice more than classic period Maya. Um, and there's geopolitical reasons why that is, but I'll bypass that to kind of stay more relevant on a practical standpoint
Sure.
because modern witches and modern occultists aren't going to be human sacrificing people.
Right.
And if you are, then you're not a very good practitioner if you have to sacrifice somebody just to get results.
Yeah, it's a little
Um,
extreme.
so what it consists of, like in the simplest sense, is you have an effigy of the deity, you have candle, and you have copal incense. Specifically copal incense is the big one. And that's what like a basic Maya ritual would look like. Basic attunement, There's clearly, as like advanced practitioners, we know it's more than that. Like, yeah, you can just like have a sigil or something and talk to a deity, right? But while that is legit, it's not as efficacious as like ceremonial evocation, right?
Sure.
So while legit, it's just not the same. So like my rituals, especially right now with my forthcoming book, what I've been prioritizing is deity worship. So it is very much, I have carved masks from Mexico. So if you do go on vacation and whatnot, you could get a depiction of a deity, put that on an altar, construct an altar, and then start communicating with the deity, making offerings and stuff, and then
Oh,
developing a
wait, like hold on. You mean like these? Is that what you're
yeah,
talking
you
about?
yeah. So you
Yeah.
could start with something like that, just a kind of
Yeah.
depiction of the deity, and that one's cool. On the one with these shell is cool because it has a glyphs on the side too. I can't see the glyphs. They look like day sign glyphs. Yeah, those are day sign glyphs.
Oh, interesting.
Those are, so it doesn't look like it's all 20, but you could start working with those on their respective days.
Hmm.
You can draw glyphs and whatnot. The only thing I would say, like if you want to do deity worship, do not print out like a crappy like HP printer, um like just a regular printout from your homeschool printer, um that's all kind of like pixelated, and it's got like those bars that like interrupt the colors and things like that,
Sure.
because that gets like just let's say, is that a worthy vessel for a
Right.
deity? No.
Don't be disrespectful.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So having a proper effigy. So like with the masks and stuff, all of my masks have specific deities tied to them. Not all masks do, but it doesn't mean that it can't like connect to a deity. You just kind of have to put it in there. You have to sigilize it essentially.
Hmm.
Um, like just focus enough a specific deity on that way. Now, I would say because that mask didn't look like it was to a specific deity, you would probably
And
have to use a hieroglyph.
no, actually, I think it was supposed to be goddess of the moon.
No, that's each child. I'm talking about the mask.
Oh, the mask. Yeah, I think this is just a Highland mask. This is not like for a
Yes.
specific deity or
Uh,
anything.
so I actually don't have Highland masks here. Highland masks at my parents' place.
Hmm.
But these are more Belizean and Yucatecan masks. But what you could do with that is you could consecrate it to a specific god of which the depiction flatters, but you would probably need one of the hieroglyphs, the name glyphs of the deity
Oh, sure,
in order
sure.
to do it. But yeah, you could go from there. So like having a proper effigy of the deity, and that's what you would do. So like that's like how rituals would be done nowadays are much more like, they're practical. I'll give you an example. So like the daykeeper tradition, right? They do fire ceremonies, what are known as fire ceremonies. If you did a fire ceremony in the United States, you would probably be arrested because the fire marshal would have a hissy fit with you because they're
Yeah,
like huge bonfires. You lay up a whole bunch of flowers and geometric patterns based upon the day signs, and you put a ton of sugar as an offering. But unless you want a bunch of pests and you want a out of control fire because sugar is highly flammable, it may not be you just don't have the room for stuff like this. And like Chichicastenango and Quetzaltenango, those cities, they actually have like pavilions where they have giant burn pits where you can do these things, where the daykeepers do their things.
right.
You can't do that here, and you can't do that most places. So how do you develop personal connection? This is where I do like there are critics of people trying to make more modern practices for the Maya and the Maya spirits because uh what we are resembling would probably be what like common folk resembled, not the ancient kings or like massive white city state rituals or the daykeepers do. It's going to look like just very personal and primitive. And do we have much evidence for that? Or well, we do have evidence for it in my households, but do we have elaborate evidence for it in comparison to those other forms of rituals? No, we don't.
Yeah.
So all I got to say is to my detractors in the Danza communities that the Danzas are great. They're great for building community. They're great for reclaiming culture. They're even great for spiritual gnosis. But I can't have a Danza every time I need something in life.
Sure.
I can't have
Yeah.
a Danza. If I want to worship a deity, I can't just invite a bunch of people and put regalia on. Like it's impractical. So, um, develop a personal relationship with deity. Are there actual like distinct ritual systematic formulas that I have in order to contact the spirits? Yes, but that's that's a lot. Like it's more than a
Yeah.
podcast can off. It's like we don't have the
Right.
time and
Right.
means to do such right now.
Yeah. Are there any rituals that you think are worth looking into for somebody watching this that wants to know more? Could you point them in the right direction?
I would say there's sources. There's not there's really not a lot of good books written for various reasons.
Sure.
2012, while some Maya daykeepers actually got kind of a platform to speak on,
Hmm.
they didn't have the largest voice when it came to 2012. Ironically, it was non-Maya people. It was probably people that were much more affluent and spoke English that had,
Right.
uh, you know, um, so I would recommend a few books. There is the Maya astrology book by Kenneth Johnson. That's legit. He is actually a mentor of mine. He was an initiated daykeeper. There is the book called The Book of Destiny by Carlos Barrios, who is one of the most famous daykeepers, which the Mayan Wisdom Project today, that's his lineage. And I would say start with the Popol Vuh. The Popol Vuh is here. So this is the Maya creation story. This is the bedrock of all Maya mythology, of surviving Maya mythology. Um, The reason why is that it's not just a holy book. First of all, you read it, you'll get gnosis. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that Dennis Tedlock, the translator, the anthropologist, him and his wife Barbara Tedlock were actually initiated as daykeepers. And so their end notes of that book are golden. Like it's full of indigenous knowledge. And he had his mentor Andre Chilot with him throughout the process of making the Popol Vuh translation. The endnotes have magic in them. As far as magical formula, no, but magical information, yes. So let me extend this to like what can people do now, right now to um get more in touch with the Maya stuff because I have plans, right? I'm writing a book. I'm coming out with courses and within the next year and stuff. I'll be promoting all this stuff. I'll be starting up a YouTube channel, so you'll have to make room on the YouTube couch for me. Um
Please do. Yes.
and so I'll be providing resources and actual practical like interfaces in which to do this. However, there is like the practical spell casting stuff when it comes to magicians, which is occultists, right? But on the flip side, there's also comprehensive attributes that make a magician more, I guess, more powerful, more knowledgeable. The more you can comprehend magic and understand it without doing practical exercises, you're still getting better at magic.
Mhm.
So if you want to engage with the Maya cosmos, read the Popol Vuh, read the other books I said, and they'll raise your comprehension. Is there much of a ritual process in those books? No, but you are becoming in tune with a living cosmos that you didn't know was as layered as it actually is. Here's a practical tip I'll give you, and everybody always asks me this with interviews, and they ask every magician this on every podcast. What is your top tip for beginners? Caveat: I hate that question because it's keeping beginners beginners.
Yeah,
It's like,
I
how
get
do
it.
we take a beginner and make them an intermediate? And how do we take an intermediate and make them advanced?
Right.
This is my biggest tip. Expand your cosmology. How do you do that? You basically take a map of a universe, whatever it is. It could be the Kal chakra from Tibetan Buddhism. It could be the Tree of Life. It could be Yggdrasil from Norse mythology, or it could be the Maya cosmos. And I said, like, literally just Google Mayan cosmos or Maya Tree of Life. There's several drawings that are on Google Images. Print one of them out, plaster it, like tape it to a wall, and like think about it once a day. Like stare at it for maybe a minute, then go about your day. But leave it in a place where you pass by all the time. It's like a sigil. It's going to download into your head. You're advertising to yourself. So instead of like driving down the road and constantly seeing the Taco Bell sign and be like, oh, I'm in the mood for Taco Bell, instead of getting that kind of programming, you're programming yourself to a larger universe:
Mhm.
overworld, middle world, underworld, and then the various channels within. So
Yeah.
sigilize this, and you will be having a Maya experience, a Mayan experience with the cosmos sooner rather than later. That's the best like practical magic uh procedure I could give without like otherwise it would be like a whole procedure, like, but that's
Yeah.
a magic trick that you can do to start raising your comprehension. That being said, you could do it with any cosmology, but there's some good maps out there on just Google, very different ones
Yeah.
that map it out
Yeah.
that you can use for your own magical comprehension.
I think that's really, really great advice. And you're so true. I hate that question where, because I get that question with chaos magic too. What's the best tips for beginners? And I'm like, first of all, chaos magic doesn't, never mind, it doesn't prescribe to dogma. So that's hard to, whatever. I'm
Yeah.
not going to go on that tangent, but I get what you're saying. That's actually really good practical advice. I want to dive into your practice specifically because you are so eclectic. You're such an intelligent occultist. You also practice a little bit of Solomonic magic alongside, bringing in your ancestral roots. So can you talk about what your practice actually looks like, maybe some of your daily rituals or things that you just really deeply connect to, or even talk about your altar, whatever you're comfortable with?
Yeah, we can talk about the altar.
Yeah.
Just being exposed to the information, I would say, is a part of my practice. I'm writing a book, so you gotta like research takes a lot.
Yeah, you gotta know
Research
your
takes a
shit.
lot, right?
Yeah.
So that's a part of it. But I would say deity worship is probably the cornerstone, but daily practice, I have to observe the day signs because those are the living forces of the day. So in a way, I'm definitely not an initiated daykeeper as of right now, but I maintain a practice of where I am crafting ritual tools. I'm working with specific authentic jade importers and jade craftsmen from Central America to make day sign jewelry essentially out of jade,
Oh, that's cool.
and developing relationships with the respective day signs. That's a daily thing. But there's also like deity worship that I do that I'll send you pictures of the masks.
Yeah.
I work with roughly 20 deities, depending on how you cut them.
Mhm.
There's many more than that, but these are the ones that I have consecrated masks to, that are, a labor of love by indigenous artists. They're huge. They're professionally carved. Probably saw several of them, or of similar flavor. And that I will do. I have specific candle recipes, essentially, and candle procedures that I do.
Hmm.
Um, there's a technique that is in a lot of folk Hispanic witchcraft called spiraling a candle, um, where you use smaller chimes and tapers to do. That's a very effective practical witchcraft
Tell
method
me
that I'd
about
never
that.
seen anybody.
Yeah. What is
Okay.
that?
If I could do it, I would show you. But essentially, like pretend I got a chime,
Mhm.
and I start at the bottom, and I poke my thumb into it. And as I'm going to turn the candle, and I'm going to spiral my thumbnail all the way to the top. And I'm going to chant. If I'm specifically working with a deity, you can do this for intention, or you could do this to channel a deity. I'll recite names of a deity to consecrate the candle to them. Now, if it's a chime, the chimes are actually very, very effective in this regard. Like a
Mhm.
lot of people like poo-poo chimes because, oh, it's not big enough. The thing is that if you match correspondences, then they're better than a lot of fancy candles. Depending on where the deity originates from, if it's the underworld, I'll use 9. If it's the middle world, I'll use 7, and I'll use 13 for the upper world, with the appropriate color correspondence
Mhm.
for the deity. But I'll chant either my intention, or if it's a deity, typically I'll chant like 4 names of the deity. And these are offerings to candles. I'll burn them on the plate, and then I have 13 spiraled candles, or 7 or 9 spiraled candles.
Yeah.
And I will incorporate flowers. That's a whole nother discussion, though. The way that you offer flowers in Mesoamerican practice, it's not just you put them in a vase.
Mhm.
Putting them in a vase is more ancestral. That's like offering to abuelita or something,
Yeah. Okay.
or a family member.
Okay.
But when you offer them to a deity, you have to cut them a specific way.
What does that mean? What do you mean?
You cut the flower blossom off the stem with an obsidian knife.
Oh, wow. What do you do with the blossom then? Or do you keep the stems?
You uh
Or you can't tell me?
I'll hold off on that part. But
Okay.
you do all
Sure.
you so you do offer the blossoms to the deity,
Hmm.
but what you do is I'm just getting a ping to not say too much right now.
Nope. Understood. I got it.
About that part. But you assort the blossoms with the candle,
Hmm.
or with the candles, and you go from there.
Hmm.
Another like major, I guess, spellcraft that I do is what's called, have you ever seen pull-out candles? These are very big at botanicas. They're not big at metaphysical shops. See, because
I describe them because I'm not sure if I do or not.
I can
Like,
actually I can pull one out and show you,
oh
like
yeah,
if you
yeah.
want.
Yeah, yeah.
Just hold the phone really quick. All right, so there's novena candles, right?
Yeah.
Novena candles are pretty common. You could do that too. That's very big in indigenous and Latin American folk magic. But it's super common that it's like if I just said it, it's like, well, duh. Like it's nothing special. So I'm gonna offer you some gold here.
All
This is a
right.
pull-out candle. I've never seen I no, I recently saw them at a metaphysical shop, but I found them at botanicas. See, when I was growing up, I never knew what a metaphysical shop was. I knew what a botanica was because
Of
that's
course.
growing up in the culture. So this is a candle that you can actually pull out.
Oh, love that.
So what I do is that on the plate, so you carve certain symbols onto here, and you pack them with herbs and oils,
Hmm.
and then you put them back in, and then you draw appropriate hieroglyphs on the I'm sorry, you draw appropriate hieroglyphs on the glass, and then you draw appropriate hieroglyphs on the plate, and then you do the flowers and stuff that I mentioned
Wow.
before. So there's a whole system. Now I will say that's like it's typically intention on the plate, astrological, like the Maya astrology on the glass, deity specific stuff on the candle.
Wow. I really like that distinction. I don't think I've ever worked within a system where there's certain things you do on the plate, certain things you do on the glass. I really like that though. That's really cool.
Various things to do with jade. Jade itself is a whole God, we'll go down so many rabbit holes. I think we'll veer off the path. I'll just say this is that jade is like a good luck and abundance and prosperity stone, but it also you'll liken this. Maybe we can talk another time about it. It's a narrative manipulation tool.
Ooh,
Specifically, it is a narrative manipulation tool.
interesting. So you do a lot of hypersigil work then? Of course, you probably don't call it that because that's the Grant Morrison terminology,
No,
but
but I think it's healthy terminology. And again, Grant Morrison, before I was able to, when I was a kid, I used to read his comics. Like his comics were
yeah.
like so influential on me. He got me looking at because like so Morrison did the whole cosmological map I talked about earlier. Like with the
Hmm.
DC universe, he
Hmm.
made the map for
Hmm.
DC and he based it off of Kabbalah. You can see
Yes.
it.
Yes.
But Morrison was a very big influence on me. But I
Yeah.
didn't know about the pataphysical narrative manipulation until much later, until I did more research. And I corroborated this with um the course with the archaeological course I took a few weeks ago. And I've really confirmed this narrative manipulation thing. But specifically the stone of jadeite corresponds to a narrative manipulation thing. So like if we look at um this is a good way to put it. Rose quartz, love, Venus, correspondence, right?
Sure.
It gives you a resonance to love and attraction, right?
Hmm.
Jadeite gives you a resonance towards plot armor, and the plot is the story of life.
Oh, wow. That's such a good way to put it. That is so cool. So is that, I mean, that's obviously primarily the crystal that you work with the most. Do you work with
Oh
any
yeah.
other crystals or is it just?
Obsidian. Obsidian,
Oh,
because
okay.
obsidian is it's a necessary if jade is all the good, obsidian is the thing that you use to get rid of all the bad. And it's
Mm.
because it's like essentially the spiritual surgical tool of Mesoamerica, it in itself is volatile. So it's very it's like it's absolutely necessary and there's no way to avoid it, but always proceed with caution and respect to the spirit of obsidian. So, like my Maya
Okay.
day sign is the obsidian knife, and it
Wow.
clearly because think very Martian stuff. It's not a clear one-to-one comparison between the two. It's more nuanced than that. But like, if you were born under a day sign of the obsidian knife, you were probably going to have a very hard life.
Oh,
So yeah.
can you talk about, because I know we talked about this offline just a little bit before we were recording, but can you talk about that image behind you and why you have it above your
Oh
altar and all
yeah.
of that?
Okay. So that image is commonly referred to as Hunabku, which the term doesn't really show up around until the colonial era. The colonial era, the reason why, so there's a lot of speculation, a lot of evidence that it was a Hunabku translates to soul god, like one god,
Hmm.
and um they used it as essentially like a conversion technique, like a midway station to try and wean the indigenous people off of polytheism into monotheism, specifically into a monotheism that just deified the divine masculine. And if you look at colonial era texts, this just repeated nature of bringing Hunabku up and liking it to the same thing as the Christian deity, is the Christian God.
Yeah.
It was just happening over and over and over again. Um, it specifically denied the divine feminine because if you look at either certain parts of the books of Chilam Bilam that talks about the creation of the world, the pre-Columbian creation of the world,
Hmm.
and if you look at the Popol Vuh, it doesn't start with one god. It starts with divine masculine and divine feminine at the same time. So
Interesting.
duality in this sense we kind of look at, I don't know, we kind of look at duality in the Western esoteric stuff as like bad or limiting. And it's like, no, it just, at least in this regard, it gives credence to both being equal at the same time at the dawn of creation, because you can't have one without the other. It's like having, if I only had push muscles, right? I'd be like this if I had no back muscles, right? You have to have the push and the pull. I hate to get all yin and yang with you, but it's like even Maya Daykeepers will say that like that's the kind of closest thing we can come up with.
Yeah.
Um, so Mesoamerican mythology starts with a divine couple. It does not start with this idea of even like a divine totality. Is it there? Can it be like meditated upon? Yes, that's kind of what Hunabku now means, because enough people have like recited Hunabku since the colonial period that they do identify it with either a oneness or because look, it's two different colors. They'll even like Danza communities and like Chicano communities will reclaim it as meaning both divine masculine and feminine. And it
Oh.
kind of fits. But the history does suggest that yeah, it was a Catholic tool to kind of like bring people in. And Jose Arguales, who was a essentially a scam artist, but like he was like a new age practitioner that did influence a lot of modern curanderismo. And he actually had some good influences, but daykeepers today are outspoken and say that he does not represent Maya people. And he just took a bunch of different stuff and put it together. He made his own astrological system, called it Mayan astrology, and it really incorporated a lot of I Chang.
Mhm.
That design isn't inherently Maya, like the way that it's presented, the way it's like really illustrated. I believe it originally comes from the Zapotec regions of
Yeah.
Oaxaca, Mexico. But the thing is that you see that same kind of curling design on certain Maya deities' noses and their breaths and temple size. I have it tattooed here because you you see it everywhere in temple sites. It's most pronounced in Zapotec architecture, but it's everywhere in Mesoamerica. It's just like the Zapotecs did the best job with it. They look really cool. The Zapotec
Yeah.
um ruins at Mitla and Monte Alban, they're the ones that like really like pronounce those zigzag kind of things. And what it represents is like the sacred breath. There's a sacred breath. Like kind of like in a biblical sense, I guess you could say it's like we breathe and it's sacred.
Yeah.
Um I'll here's something interesting. So there's a lot of BS when it comes to like energy magic trying to reach into a Mesoamerican flavor. It's largely hogwash. I've spent time in Mexico and Belize and Guatemala, and I've seen that there's a lot of like wannabe gurus that are essentially saying that there's Maya energy systems, but they're just reciting mantras and they're using the seven chakra system. It's a
Mhm.
shame because there actually are indigenous pre-Columbian energy systems and energy magic that was used. And I would probably throw this on, we went over the elements, like the main elements of the practice. I would probably throw this under shamanism or animism.
Mhm.
Um, the bodies, the energy bodies correspond to the day signs. So there's 20 energy bodies that way. There's also 13 energy bodies because there's 13 joints in the body,
Mhm.
ending with the neck joint. Then there are also like three primary like energy sources. So one is called ku'u, which is like it just translates to holiness. It can be used even as like a prefix or a suffix to describe a god. Like
Mhm.
Bolon Yokte Ku'u is a Maya deity's name. So that's a form of energy that largely corresponds to like the crown and the mind.
Mhm.
Then there's Koyopa, which is translates to the lightning in the blood. And it is a energy system that corresponds to the nervous system and the heart and the bloodstream. Then there is Ikku, which is means like holy wind, and that is the holy breath. So there are actual legitimate energy systems. Just named like three different types. But again, in order to make a practice out of this, there's no how-to guides. You have to go into indigenous communities that you don't speak the same language as, or you have to dive into a bunch of academic material that's largely boring. And a lot of people don't want to do that, and they just want to get to the meat and potatoes,
Yeah.
and they also want to earn a buck. So let's
Yeah.
throw some chakras on it and call it a day,
So
right?
true. It's unfortunately true. You just made me think of like standard ritual tools. Does that exist in your practice? Like, do you have an obsidian knife that you use on a regular basis, or what other
Yes.
tools are the most important parts of your practice?
If I were to count them down, the most important ritual tools for me would be obsidian knife, number
Mhm.
one. The reason being too is that the obsidian knife symbolically, like you could use it like in a bit more imaginative ways of like maybe banishing and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
But what it is that if I was going to call a Maya god, I would always bring an obsidian knife because what it shows is that conceptually obsidian is to say I've sacrificed something. Like that, all of the cosmology is based on sacrifice. The gods sacrificed themselves to make us. Kind of like the Aztec myth of the sun, where a god has to dive into the sun and take the place of it, but is always burning to keep us lit and to keep us
Yeah.
warm. At the beginning of the Popol Vuh, there are gods that fight a war that lasts endless eons against these gigantic kaiju monsters that are essentially the universe before creation. They embody chaos. So the gods sacrifice endless numbers of themselves to fight on our behalf. Um, Even corn is a sacrifice of the gods. It's a holy materia. We are made of a holy materia, whereas like other attempts to make us became unholy materia. And kind of a almost s- think similar, definitely not the same as like Nephilim or even like Gnostic mythology of like there are unholy hollow creations that look like us essentially.
Sure.
But then there are us that are made children of maize that are made of holy matter. So not all matter is bad. There is holy matter. But obsidian, and you holding obsidian, shows that you are one of the ones is aware that coming to the gods requires a sacrifice, even if it's a theological sacrifice, a philosophical sacrifice. So, obsidian knife number one. Second, jade. I've mentioned it before. Having authentic jade. Just a note about jade. Jade is the most forged stone in the world.
Oh, wow. I didn't know
It
that.
is the most, yeah.
Wow.
Um, it's usually dyed quartz, so just make sure you're getting your jadeite from a reputable source. Um, I have suggestions, but and jade is actually to this day like proper jadeite is the second most expensive stone in the world, only behind blue diamond.
Oh, wow.
So if you get
You
legit jadeite, it's a sacrifice. It
right.
costs a
It's
bit.
expensive.
So
Can we link some of your suggestions in the description box?
yeah,
Because
I'll meet you though.
okay, cool. Because I know that some people will absolutely ask about that. Okay,
Yeah.
carry on. So obsidian knife, jade, obviously.
Jade, seashell. And so
Oh,
I have
yeah.
combined the seashell with a pendulum, making a pendulum out of a seashell. So why a seashell? I could do a whole seminar on this because if I said golden ratio Fibonacci sequence, there's a lot of like bullshit meters that will start sounding off, and for good reason.
Hmm.
However, this is a notion that archaeologists agree on. Like it's one of the actual like spiritual concepts that uh authority figures like Dr. Edwin Barnhart will write off and say like this is legit, and they still use it. Like it's used in modern like thatched hut, like how the Maya built thatched huts today. They use the same mathematical equation. But the golden ratio is actually mentioned in the Popol Vuh too. It's how the gods designed the universe. They actually like the Maya gods essentially use a measurement with a string and a cord and a stick to use the golden ratio to create the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So the shell is a hearkening back to the spiral and the spiral of creation, the equation of creation.
Can we see it, or is that something that's kind of more secretive? Don't want to show it on camera. I'm just so curious
Oh,
what
the
this thing for.
shell? Oh, my
Yeah.
shell pendulum? Yeah, I can show you. Just
Yeah,
give
I
me a
would love
second.
to see it.
So this is a small shell, but
Oh, wow.
you don't have to do the pendulum. Uh, I've equipped it as a pendulum, and I consecrated this with the Maya moon and love goddess for better spirit communication. And it really like it pendulum magic period I think is really underrated because I get a lot out of it. But having a seashell, and particularly I like doing I will say that this is a modern thing. Like this pendulum thing is UPG. It's
Sure.
UPG, but it works. But if I was going to have, I would have a seashell. I mean, like a spiraled seashell, not just like a clam shell, right?
Yeah.
Um, to represent that. Also, guess what? Mathematical infinity, because they use the shell glyph to communicate either a zero or its equal and opposite infinity.
Mm-hmm.
So it harkens back to the holy mathematics that they viewed. So
Yeah.
these are cosmological tools. Ritual tools should reflect what? Something bigger than yourself,
Sure.
cosmology,
Sure.
things part of a living cosmos. And that's what the shell represents. It represents infinity. So you have a solid infinity all by your side all the time. You have
Wow.
jade, which is a essentially a good luck stone, but it orients you, directional magic, orients you to the true path.
Mm-hmm.
The obsidian knife shows that you are essentially one of the people that have sacrificed and now like trying to commune with the gods rather than just be sheeple. And it also helps cuts away distractions and bad things and keeps bad spirits away. It's an obsidian
Interesting.
knife.
Yeah.
The other thing I would have is you could interchange this one. A rattle. There are some rattles like Mesoamerican rattles. I prefer the whistles.
Hmm.
I have three consecrated whistles, consecrated one each to each realm, one for the earth, one for the heavens, and one for the underworld. Like think you like those. Have you ever seen those Aztec death whistles?
No, I haven't. I don't even know what that looks like.
Okay, I mean I can show you if you want.
Yeah, yeah, show me. I would love to see.
So let's start with the underworld. So the underworld, I have this one,
Oh, wow.
and it gets pretty loud, so I'm not going to play for you because it'll distort all the sound. But
Wow.
I use this to call if it's a deity of the underworld like Akan or Sizen. I'm saying his name incorrectly because if you say it correctly, you're conjuring death. And other gods like even Buluk Chaptan, Chimalakan, deities like that that are associated with the underworld, I will use that to call them in part of my ritual process.
Hmm.
This is for the earth, the middle world. These are a bit more like nature-based gods. This is in the shape of a monkey. So like the monkey god, or the monkey twins, Hunbats and Hun Shuyen, I'll use this to call them. Also deities like Huixiip, or also known as Awinkir Masa, the deer god,
Hmm.
or goddess. I'll use that to call them. And then this is the
Yeah.
one for the heavens.
Oh, that one's cool. Oh, I wish I could hear them, but I know we're not doing that. But oh
Uh-huh.
man, they look so cool.
Yeah, this one I'll use to call the heavens.
Yeah.
Heavenly gods like creator couple.
Yeah.
Izamna, Ischel, otherwise known as Ishbiakok and Ishmukane. I'll call on Ishsaku, the goddess of love, or Chak, the rain god,
Sure.
for those. So whatever realm they correspond, and they're fluid too, because sometimes Chak does time in the underworld. The sun god will do time in the underworld because things are cyclical. When the sun descends, it's the night sun. It's lighting up the underworld. So
So we talked about a lot today, and I know there's so much that we barely touched, and I feel like we could keep talking forever. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention about just like the secrets of Mayan magic in general, or anything as it pertains to your personal practice, or any advice that you could give, anything that we did not touch on that you want to make sure that we talk about today?
yeah, the biggest one is like because we talked about like why is it overlooked.
Hmm.
Uh, I would encourage everyone to find. I'm not trying to like insult anybody, but it does take a certain amount of courage to go and talk to somebody from a different culture that speaks a different language, that just had a different lifestyle and upbringing than you did. But I can say this from experience, not just growing up in that culture, but like it was my job to go and talk and make relationships with people from different, like winning hearts and minds, essentially.
Yeah.
Um, you can kind of put yourself in a position where you got to kind of laugh at yourself because if you learn some Spanish, are you like as a new Spanish speaker, you're speaking the same kind of language that 3-year-old speaks.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
it's okay to like laugh at yourself. And if people laugh at you a little bit, that's not a problem. Go and go to like an authentic Mexican restaurant, go to an authentic Guatemalan or a Salvadorian restaurant. And these are some of the things that have carried on through that culture. Food is a part of the animism. Like that's how I would start. Get acquainted with this whole new world of magic that you just don't know is there. And that means having the courage to go and try different foods, go and talking to different people, like maybe play soccer with them. Have the courage to go and try different things. Go try lengua, Cowton tacos or something. All of that is getting acquainted with a much larger universe than what you're used to. And then go see the ruins. Go see Chichen Itza. Go see Uxmal. Don't stay in Cancun. Cancun's where you land, but don't stay in Cancun. Cancun ain't the culture.
Get out of the
That
touristy. Yeah.
Yeah, Cancun. Did you go to Key Calker too? You went to Key Calker,
No,
didn't you? You
I
didn't go
did
to Key
not.
Calker. Okay,
I
so
Yeah, I
yeah,
knew
don't.
it was super touristy and I didn't care.
It is. I will say though, because I was at Key Calker, I hated most of it, but me and my dad were swimming, and like literally just 20 feet from the shore, this massive manta ray, like bigger than
Oh
the
yeah.
both of us swam underneath us. So I'm not completely alien. Spend a couple of days in Key Calker or
Yep.
Cancun, but go to Tikal, go to Caracol in Belize, go to San Ignacio. So like San Ignacio,
Yeah.
like that town is great, right? Because there's Cajalpech right up the hill. There's You go down south, right? There's little ruins everywhere, like little
Yep.
ancient ruins everywhere. Playa del Carmen has ruins if you look hard enough. Um, you could go to the highlands of Guatemala if you're feeling adventurous, but just go to all the major ruin sites, tap into those energies, talk to the people. You know, don't just talk to the people that speak English.
That was exactly, yeah, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's what I would start doing. You can start doing that while in the United States because
Hmm. Hmm.
there's a lot of them here. There's a lot of them here. And then there's no, I'm biased, but I think there's no better beautiful paradise than the tropical sunniness of Central America.
I
Riviera
agree.
Maya, Belize, even the jungles in Guatemala. You want to see biodiversity. The most well, it's debatable, but like land mass wise, the Amazon, most biodiverse planet in the world. Second is the Patan rainforest where you were,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, in Tikal. Um, just north of Tikal is where El Mirador and like the unexplored areas of the jungle are. It's unexplored, it's untapped, and
Hmm.
it's biodiverse as hell.
Hmm.
So yeah, go places, meet people, shake hands, eat food, be like Anthony Bourdain. That's my biggest tip.
I love that. That's so great. And it's so true what you said about soccer too. Because my partner, just as a side rant, my partner went semi-pro for soccer and almost went pro, but then had an injury and whatever. Anyways, and so he actually works with a lot of people from Mexico and Guatemala, and he plays soccer with a lot of people from Mexico and Guatemala. So like it's true. Go play a soccer game and connect with people. And that's what I say too with traveling. Like get out of these touristy places. We did not go to any of the keys. We just stayed on the mainland. We did go to Placencia though, so that's pretty touristy and got to do the snorkeling and all that stuff. But yeah, when you go to San Ignacio or you go beyond and then into Guatemala and Tikal, it was just it's such a different experience than staying in the super touristy places. So glad you brought that up. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here today and talking to us about literally everything. This was such a casual, fun conversation, especially for me to like pick your brain about some stuff that I'm very personally interested in. So thank you for being here. Also, how can people find you? You said Facebook.
Okay. So right now I'm just a Facebook person right now.
Yep.
I know it's almost like a breach of personal space, but just friend request me and stuff so you can keep up with me. I will be having a website coming out, like memberships, courses, all of that stuff. I'll be having a YouTube channel coming out too, where I talk not just about Mesoamerican practice, but all things. I got a broad amount of experience. I'll be talking about fiction for magicians, fictional writings that can actually help elevate practitioners.
Hmm.
Some of my favorite authors are very Gnostically inspired. What else? I'll be doing like I know for sure next year I'll be doing Sacred Space Conference in Baltimore, Maryland
Cool.
in 2025. My book's coming out. Can't mention the publisher right now, but it will be out hopefully first quarter 2026.
Yeah.
So that will
Congratulations again.
be
Yeah.
that'll be a great companion to go off of everything that I'll be offering. Is there anything else? I'll have a whole Instagram and all that other platforming stuff coming
Yeah.
out.
You
Maybe when
can.
it comes out, I can link it to you.
Of course, I was just
Okay.
going to say that. Send it to me in an email. So if people are watching this video in the future, I'll just update the description box whenever you have those links. So no big deal. You can just send that to me whenever it's ready. So yeah, cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Solomon. Thank you for everybody watching. I will see you all in a video very soon. Bye, everyone.